Welcome back to episode 3 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and Bill Scully, discuss the strategies and techniques necessary for ensuring that your web presence effectively serves all your stakeholders globally. In our last episode, we discussed the oversimplification of domain structure recommendations. We talked about the how and the why. There were more strategic and operational reasons to use CCTLDs over a GTLD, aside from just SEO. We also touched on the challenges of international SEO and the hreflang implementation. In this episode, we're diving into the topic of global web governance. So for the news of the week, interesting, we spoke last week about Google using AI to add an additional 110 languages. This week, Google announced that they're translating their search engine results into an additional 8 languages, basically rewriting the titles and the descriptions. What are your thoughts on this, Bill? Why would they go through this trouble? Honestly, I'm not really sure that this is a good experience for users.
I think I'm going to have to disagree with you on that one. I think as English speaking Americans, I can see why would they go to the bother. I think this honestly goes back to the MUM update that was launched, where Google's premise under MUM was to surface the best content anywhere in the world. And so the idea of this, let me give something simple. If I were, like, my wife and I were planning a trip to like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and if I did a query in there, something for that market, there may not be any English language content available. But let's say there's a brilliant example written in Kazakh or in Russian. The example Google gave was actually somebody wanting to know about a specific climbing route on Mount Fuji. And that may not exist in their local language, in English or French or whatever, but it may exist in Japanese. So they would surface that result, translate it into English, let's say, for a URI, and then allow us to see what is potentially the best result, despite it being in Japanese. And then when the user clicks through, obviously that Japanese page will be translated to English. So the premise is it could give, in I think very select cases, a more relevant result than might be available in the local language. And I think the implications of this, which I wrote about at the time, could be staggering, because now, you may have a great page in English, but if there's a better page in French or German or Japanese, you could actually drop in ranking and be replaced by something that is better, because now under MUM and all the AI stuff, they can determine a page is better across languages. So I think that's why Google is doing this. And now that they've cracked more of these languages, it's easier to do. And I honestly think we're going to see more of this, especially with more of the AI answers, when they can reach out anywhere in the world and pull back brilliant content.
So I haven't seen this in action. I had thought that what they were doing was only showing it in the AI descriptions. But you're actually saying if you click through a search result, that it would surface that page and translate it
into the language of your browser preference. So exactly the example they gave.
I missed that part.
In the show notes, there's a link to the MUM announcement where they actually give an example using this scenario with Mount Fuji, where it presented, in an English or a Japanese page where they, as you said, translated the title and the description into English. And then when you click through, it triggered the auto translate to translate the Japanese page into English. So we may not see it. I think there's so much content here in the US, but if you think about it, maybe some medical conditions. So if you were maybe, somebody, a Japanese person here on holiday, and you did a query for something either in, you'd probably do it in Japanese, but if you were to do it and maybe it's a condition that's not prominent in the US, or there's nothing in English or minimal in English, Google now can actually reach out to another market that has maybe substantial information and present you that in the search results. I think I've only seen it twice in the wild, and it's not been in the US. I've seen it in other markets where Google felt a non-local market page was really in the top 3 or 4 And I just thought it was interesting when I clicked it, the translate button popped up because the original document was actually not in an English language.
Okay, I went down a rabbit hole. I actually saw the part about the report in Google Search Console, and now you can actually monitor the clicks and impressions for translated results if you go to the search appearance filter tab in the performance report, and then you'll see the translations and the data there, which is really cool. But again, like I said, I haven't seen this actually work for me, but that's great. Let me change my opinion there.
And let's try to put out a post in the near future talking about that report, because as we've talked about in the various hreflang courses we have, and you built an amazing Looker dashboard to tell people that they're getting traffic from other markets. And so I think this is another one. This one here is explicitly where Google is telling you they translated your page into another language and showed it to people. So it may not be a lot. I saw somebody post on LinkedIn today that they didn't have any in their report, and they looked at like a 10 million page website. It just may not mean that it could be overly competitive where there is a lot of content. But in the example I put in the show notes, or we'll have in the article, actually shows an example of somebody that got a few hundred impressions, and I think it was 17 clicks, but 612 impressions when it was translated from English into Hindi. So yeah, I think it's got potential. And again, we got to thank Google for giving us some of these cool tools to find, again, these nuances that are happening with language.
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, we actually have a Looker Studio report that'll help you surface some issues you might be having with the pages showing up in the wrong markets. I need to get that up and out to people. We'll make that free. Also, I want to remind people that we have a Facebook group, and you can look at the show notes and subscribe to the Facebook group. It's a great place to have conversations about the things we're talking about in the podcast today. All right. In previous episodes, we discussed the operational and technical challenges of managing a global website and how these challenges lead to frustrations for people accountable and those who do not have any real ability to control what they do for their websites. One of those being domain and URL structures and the need for some form of governance to apply and help enforce these rules. But there's a lot more to governance than domains. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, when we talk about web governance or digital governance, I think that scares people. They run for the hills when they hear governance. That means rules and loss of flexibility. But as you sort of talked about, and as we talked about last time around domains, it really is whatever you can do in your organization, just have guidelines. Like we talked about your experience where the company said, okay, we're going to have top level domains and everybody's going to have them, or we're going to use global domains and use this folder structure where it's consistently country and then language in folders, or using a dash. That's what we're talking about. And the more of that we can have, and we're not talking about, and I've told this story at conferences. When I was at IBM, this lady brought me like 5 3-inch binders of where every pixel was managed on the website. And I asked her to hug her because I realized that by having this level of guidance, I could use it as a corporate form of corporate judo. I could get people to do my bidding by simply getting these things in the rule book. And really, that's really what we want to think about. We want to go back and forth and have a discussion about this framework, this simple idea of, having a way, policy, standards, rules. Hell, you can even do it in a PowerPoint presentation. This is generally how we do this. But the key thing that I think each should collaborate on some tips and ideas is this idea of having a council and bringing subject matter experts together. And I think one of the things we talked about in the previous episodes has been there's not enough collaboration between folks. And so I think by getting these subject matter experts together, and representing all the different, anybody that touches the web should be in this group, and then some sort of executive to help enforce it. But really, that's what we want, is some form of documentation that really helps us align our business presence to our goals and objectives, and really helps people do their day-to-day work. Anything else to that? Anything? Do we want to soften that definition? Do we want to extend that definition? What's your thinking?
Governance sounds really scary, but it's definitely the right idea. So I wouldn't soften it. I think there's different ways to approach it. You could definitely approach it with different words than governance. Like, I know in one company where I worked, I actually created what we called the steering team. And a steering team reported to an executive manager. We basically had the budget for the web. And what I ended up doing was I took the most vocal people in digital, and it usually turned out to be the biggest markets. And we had a team of 7 people, and we basically set the agenda. We made sure that what we wanted to work on was going to help the organization by reaching out to all of our other people, everybody, including developers. So we made this network, and it went back and forth. And I thought we did some really great work. And crawl, walk, run. So you don't want to boil the ocean, but you want to solve everybody's biggest problem first, and then that gets everybody involved.
And that would be my question. It's like there's so many things, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, at IBM, it was 5 3-inch binders. And now it's obviously probably in a wiki somewhere. But what are some of the big problems? Where are some things you would recommend that people focus on trying to get uniformity, collaboration, or rules? We talked about URLs, we talked about domains. Anything else you think should be sort of centralized, or, well, that's an even bigger problem that should have some rules and guidance?
Yeah, so I would say you want to make sure that you're working on the right stuff and the right people know about the work that you're doing. So for me, I would almost start with analytics. If you could have some way to put together a combined report, very top level, and you can get very granular for people that need the granular information. But usually in an organization, competition makes people move. So that would be one thing that I would include in the governance, of having a combined report, and that usually then rolls down to having requirements for how to put together that report, and that then goes down into your tools and your URL structure and blah blah blah.
I think that's great. It reminds me of a time when I was at IBM. It was really frustrating trying to get business units to do things. Despite having all the governance and rules we had, there was business units that sometimes didn't follow it. They didn't want to do SEO. And so I created a report like you described, and basically showed the performance of each business unit. And there was a business unit that had no green in their report, and another one had a little green. And this ended up making it into a presentation to the CMO. And his question was, where's the green? Hey, business unit, to this senior vice president, where's the green? And so we used to call that, lovingly, the "where's the green" report, because it did motivate them, because he got called out on a carpet and had to explain why he wasn't playing along. And I think, that's another thing you can use, right? You can use any kind of analytics as a carrot or a stick, right? The carrot is, if you've got green and it's sort of moving in the right direction, then let's pat them on the back. Let's compliment them. If you don't have green, then let's use it as a stick and get people to do it. And I think, speaking of sticks, let's go back to the sort of dirty side of governance, is enforcement. And, if you're a market manager, you probably want less governance. If you've got a global role, you probably want more governance. And so I love it how you got the steering committee together, and because I'm assuming it had not only the roles, but it had market representation. So everybody gets to collaborate and talk about the outcomes. Were there any benefits that you came across when you were doing this, besides obviously performance improved? You saved a lot of money. Anything else you think people can sort of latch onto and put in a, hey, if we did this, no matter how small, even a lunch and learn post some search conference or have a lunch and learn after listening to this podcast. What are some of the other benefits people might reap from this?
Well, simple, obvious one was any new websites need to be built on the current CMS system. That saves tons and tons of money. It basically puts governance into the simple creation of a page. And, I've been with the company that probably rebranded 5 times in 5 years.
Wow.
Whenever you have to go through those rebrands, it's a simple one template change, for a header. You don't have, 40, 50 different websites all having to go in and make those changes. And so that would be another one that I think is helpful, very helpful.
I want to circle back to cost savings. There's a couple experiences I had the first time that again, when I was at IBM, this is when I had all my epiphanies about how to manage an enterprise. And by optimizing the templates and having the templates centralized and managed, everybody had the same template. I had the dev team, the people editing not editing template, but fixing things in the templates. We were tracking, we had a time code that they had for template fixes or changes. And I needed a way to demonstrate revenue. So I just said, hey, can you pull me a report of the time that was spent on template changes and or I'm just going to say changes, template manipulation before and after we went to common templates. And when we took that, we took the common sort of labor man hour, and we found that we had saved 300 and some $1,000 because the edits that we were doing across multiple templates, the rebranding is a great one, right?
Yeah.
If we didn't have a widget to change that it's now 2024, we'd have to go into, 95 templates and change that. Or because if everybody had a different template, you had to do it. And that was an interesting one. We're like, wow, we saved 300 grand. Or not having 25 different agencies make 25 different templates or websites saves X. It's not
But
good for the agency, but it's
but
great for the company.
but there's all this unrecognized, I'd call it revenue. Now you're freeing up the devs to do stuff that brings in money.
Exactly. And it's interesting, again, there's costs that we send out, there's costs that we save. And I think that right there, that point about freeing the devs up to do other things is another byproduct of your steering committee. Because I think if you're all in talking about like, sprints and projects and stuff, it's going to give you insight into these. And you can say, if you're the search person, we need to do this or that. So I think that's another one that I think maybe on a future episode we should talk about is how we leverage the sharing and your steering committee recommendation to maybe get SEO things or international things or localization things into other projects and then leverage things that are already being done. I think that's another great byproduct out of getting the right people together and talking about, the way forward. So this governance, so we talked about the idea of governance, we talked about the depth, and it can be as deep or as broad as you want it. You mentioned the great thing is putting some sort of metrics against it, tracking both the actual uplift in opportunity as well as any savings. I think these were all really great tips for folks that are looking to think about this. And hopefully we've taken the enormity out of that, because I've heard people say, I can't even think of it because who's going to write this and who's going to do this?
It's
Any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, it could be, well, it shouldn't be an informal committee, but the committee can operate informally. You don't have to create, binders of information. You could do it by almost memo. And again, I would say what you want to do is you really want to first focus on solving everyone else's problems, because then you become a friend and then the ideas get bubbled up to you. But from a point of governance and, depending on where you are in this governance structure, we were just talking about web, but, you know, content quality and consistency, localization and translation, legal compliance. I mean, these are all things that take place, and why have it take place, in 30 different markets?
Exactly. I mean, you can, whether you tin cup a solution, if you need tools to do diagnostics, a lot of bigger companies, they check to make sure you've got the correct logo. They've got the right privacy statement link. So there are a lot of things and a lot of tools already that people use. You might be able to tap into them. I want to mention one you just made me think about this: press releases. You know, Press releases, they're often done by an external press agency. And it's interesting how many companies, when you try to get them to simply link to the very product that they're promoting, it baffles me how many companies send out, hey, we've got a brand new, purple widget, and it's the best thing in the world. And the only link, maybe the only link is in the bottom, is a link to the homepage.
Yeah.
Because that's the standard.
Yeah.
That's what's worked in old school PR. And so, breaking into those standards to change things like that, I think are huge.
Yeah, so there's a whole nother level of that. I hadn't thought about it as far as governance, but there's a whole nother level of sharing best practices and getting advantages of those. Things as simple as, where do you store your campaigns? Can you run a report of all the campaigns for the month? Are you using the same tags? Are you using the same parameters for campaigns? Can you slice and dice by your Google ads, by your, if you have QR codes, if you have vanity URLs? It'd be, if you have a governance around how to put together those parameters, then you can create some really nice reports and start to look at the return on results.
And governance on the parameter. So today, I love the timeliness of this. So this morning I was onboarding a company into hreflang Builder, and we talked about one of the mapping, because they're all over the place with commonality. Again, they said, yeah, it'd be great if we had uniform URLs. And they said, but the one thing we have, because I mentioned all the different ways we could map, and they said, yes, we use Tag Manager to insert a tag for every page, because this manager said, I just created a report, or had my analytics team create me a report. I wanted to know how our individual solutions were doing around the world in terms of traffic. And I'm like, dude, that's awesome. We can suck that code out dynamically. And I said, just show me where it's at. Help me find it. So we went to the first page in Italy and pulled it up, and he goes, it's right here. And I see a puzzled look on his face. And then we went to one in Spain, same page in Spain, and it was in Spanish. And you could see he wanted to strangle somebody, because the instructions were to use the name of that actually in French. But in Spain, somebody used the Spanish version and somebody used the Italian version in Italy. And that's what he's like, look, I wrote the guidelines for this, but there was no enforcement.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly to your point, is that so much could come from just following some of these rules, because they probably never said it must be, this word. Somebody used the local equivalent, and a simple requirement to use that would have made that a totally different outcome. So I think that's an interesting thing. Again, the benefit of having governance across different areas of the web.
Yeah, and I'll give you another quick example of, you create this great campaign, generates a whole bunch of backlinks. People then turn off the campaign, and nobody thinks to redirect it. I mean,
right.
Duh.
And I think that's another one, just a process for sunsetting products, sunsetting campaigns. Just, if we're always doing campaigns, why not have a campaign page? They're not a client anymore, so I can throw them under the bus. Jameson whiskey. St. Patrick's Day happens every year. Guess what they do? Every year they kill the St. Patrick's Day page after St. Patrick's Day. So the next year comes up, we restart it. All the links that were generated for the previous year, gone. Everything starts from scratch. So it's like, how about we keep that page, throw some tweets up there, throw a countdown counter, anything.
Yeah.
Just keep.
That's a great idea. Countdown
think
counter.
about it, right?
I thought about that. Yeah. I would normally bury it. Keep it in a sitemap and bury the page.
But keep the page live. Keep that equity for 25 years of St. Patrick's Day, or whatever promotions, can point to that. So anyways, it's almost limitless what you can come up with, and start with. Maybe that's what they start with, Bill. Maybe they start with, how do we deal with our campaign pages? How do we deal with, sunsetting article pages, product pages? Let's come up with guidelines on that, right? Whatever they may be.
It's funny to hear people say like legal won't let us keep anything about the product up anymore. And I'm like, but people are still searching for it. They're going to get it somewhere else.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Somebody else can answer that question. So again, if you argue to legal, we all refer to it as the, profit limitation team. But try to help them understand there's probably nothing that prevents you from redirecting it, because nobody's thinking of doing that.
You can have a page that says we no longer sell this. We replaced it with this product. I mean, just get them to your site.
So we need to do this episode, because I think we both got some great examples of what to do with end of life pages and content that's been sunset, because many people in the search community and in the content community have very different opinions. Leave it, just let it be out there forever. Others are like, yeah, let's get rid of that stuff when it's no longer adding value. I think we could probably have a nice discussion on how to meet in the middle and create guidelines. But yeah, whatever it is, do a guideline. Start with something, start small, get people bought in on it, share it with everybody who needs to see it. And yeah, and let us know. Like as Bill said, go to the Facebook group. Let us know if you've done it, how you've done it, success, failure, resistance you got, and the community will try to help you with some interesting ways to maybe push through.
Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there. I want to change the subject here. So I probably spend about 8 hours a week keeping up to date on search topics via Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook groups, the major industry pubs. I don't really publish anything. I don't really get into the fights that take place or tell people they're wrong. If some people are asking questions, I'll give them my answer. But I find that I am just spending more and more time trying to fact check information and confirm my knowledge. I know we've talked about this over the years, this concept that frustrates you, actions out of context and nuance, or the lack of it in SEO problem solving. Why don't you rant on this? I know this is something you want to talk about.
I don't think we're going to solve it. I think there's just a lot of ego responses or ego bruised responses, or it's probably the number one reason that I don't use social media. There's time I want to scream, like we were mentioning before this, that today was one of those days where I saw 3 or 4 things that just make you want to scream. You want to say you're an idiot, but I just don't. I just think, but where we get problems is when our clients see that, or friends, or other people in the industry will come to us and ask our opinion, especially when clients do it. And I often have to, and you use the magic words, context and nuance, and within the concept of what it's being talked about. And I think this is why I've always hated Google giving responses on Twitter or X now, where
half responses,
partial responses to them,
without
things.
Legalese responses.
Exactly. And so people will take that and run. And in our hreflang errors course, and then I think it's in the big mother of all hreflang courses, I have these examples where people have taken a tweet answer, not just from a Google representative, but others, and made that gospel completely out of context of what's being talked about. I mean, one that frustrated me a lot was somebody asked the question in hreflang about using dashes or underscores, and the guideline says use dashes. And then this person came back and said, but in your document on how to deal with URLs, you say it's sort of, you can use either dashes or underscores. So I'm wondering why, why we can't use underscores for hreflang. I think the actual response was, what is the truth? What is the answer? And they gave the answer, like it's a dash. Just
Mm.
accept it. It's a dash. But people do that. They combine things. And your point about fact checking, people will make a statement. The one that's drove me insane, and I actually sort of promised myself I wouldn't rant about it, was the headline in the article was, you don't have to put robots text in the root domain anymore.
What?
Right? Exactly. And then it was like dot dot dot, you can do a central one if you're using a CDN. Right? So I know it was
Ah,
total clickbait, right?
yeah.
Total
Okay.
clickbait.
Yeah.
But I've had one person ask me about this, and they're not using a CDN. They're like, we actually don't want to put it in a root because it's hard. Yeah, it's like, yeah, we can only control what's in like the UK folder. So can I put a robots text and deviate from it? And it's like, that's not what they said.
Mm.
And that's the thing, is we take something, we take part B of an AB scenario. And what Gary said is, if you're using a CDN and you've got a bunch of different nuances based on location or folder structures, you can use one central robots text on the CDN, and that eliminates the need from doing it across a dozen other places. Right. And that's what he was saying. But people lose that nuance. So I've seen people say, hey, you no longer have to put it in a root, or you don't have to do this. Get the full facts. And I think when you read something that you get a reaction like Bill did, like, what? That doesn't sound right. Challenge it, look at it and say, well, what's the spec say? Don't, I try to never reference anything that's not cited by Google,
I'm
or
the
any
same
other
way.
search engine, right?
Or multiple case studies. Like you mentioned, like clients, like I spend a lot of time trying to justify my ticket to developers because they say, "Oh no, that's wrong."
Yeah, I read Steve or Sally
Yeah.
Ann's blog, and they said do it this way. And it's like, we have a rant actually in the error training session where I say, why? Somebody please tell me why our developers and many SEOs will take a third party 5-year old blog post as more valid of a source than this. Now I know we've got, issues with Google and their, ambiguity and clarity, but for the most part, if it's a relatively simple statement, maybe that's a better thing than somebody that said, hey, I did 3 tests and it worked for me. That's my little bugaboo with like the EU as being a country trying to use it in hreflang. It is not a country. It is an economic and legal zone, and so it's not. And people have said, oh, it sort of worked for me, or it worked for this company. I think there's other factors of why it worked. So
That was the point, like nuance and context. Like it worked for you, okay, but did you do a relaunch? Maybe the content was better.
right.
You know?
And
Could
again, so take it with a grain of salt, figure out, again, like you said, do your fact check. If it looks funky and it's not citing sort of a reputable source, then fact check it. And I think, and be nice to people. I think that's the other thing. Let's be nice to people. Yeah, send your cards and letters through our Facebook channel. But yeah, we welcome it. We welcome the discussion. But yeah, be nice to people, fact check, because I can tell you taking that extra time, fact checking something is far more efficient than having developers deploy something that was wrong or misunderstood and then losing credibility and time getting them to unravel something. I think it's key that we give as many facts and examples and test cases as we possibly can.
I think that's a great wrap up for this topic. Do you have anything you want to say for our listeners?
Nope, this was a lot, and just go out and try to, put any sort of governance rules, steering committee, something, try something. Let's float it and see how much resistance you get to it. And yeah, and then fact check and give people reputable links to stuff. That's pretty much my wrap up for today.
Okay, good. And I think I'll take a look at that committee document that we crafted. Maybe I'll share that on a Facebook group so people can take a look and adopt it for themselves.
Sounds good. And by all means, if there's anything that the listeners want us to talk about, please let us know.
Okay, great. Well, good seeing you.
Yep, same here.
Goodbye, everybody. Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.